Hello and welcome back. So now we are looking at section 5 part B, which is looking at working out the key and the cadence of a given section. So we have these kind of dotted boxes, kind of F and G, which are asking us to work out the key and cadence at those points. So let's work out the key here at F first. So what key is this part in? And what this is really asking you is, what's the 1? So I'm just going to put that in kind of Roman numeral. So what is the 1? Or in Roman numerals it would be I. So we're going to have to work out what chords we have here. So firstly, let's work out what chords we have. So what do we have? We have the notes D, F sharp, because if you look at the key signature, we are still we still have F sharps popping up. A and D again. So D, F sharp, A, that's a D major chord. Lovely. Just going to write this shorthand for now. So D major, and then what do we have on this other chord? Because we need 2 chords here, and it looks like it's only got a single note. Like, oh, well, it's just the note G. But if you think this chord is still playing until this beat because it's kind of being held over, it's just more to exclude this note than it is to just be this one. So check what notes we have here. So we have this one's still being played, and this one's still being played. So we have the notes E, C sharp, G, and A. So we have 4 unique notes, A, G, C sharp, and E. So this is one of those, so we can tell because it's got 4 unique notes, it's probably going to be a 7th chord. And if we worked it out by stacking it up, we would get an A chord of some description. And we've got the A to C sharp, which is major, so it's going to be either major or dominant most likely. And with the G instead of a G sharp, which is a tone away instead of a semitone away, it's a A7 chord. But don't worry about that because it doesn't actually kind of matter that much. It's more about the numbers. So we can work out these 2 at the same time. So we need to work out what cadence we have. So there are 3 types of cadences that normally show up in these Bach chorales. There's a 4th one, but I think it's mainly going to be these 3. So 5 to 1, 4 to 1. These are our final kind of cadences, or final-ish. And then we have another one, which is, anything. Could be a 2, a 4, whatever, but ending on 5. In a Bach chorale, you can always tell where the cadence is because it's got a pause over it. And the pause is the last note, so this cadence will be from kind of here to here. This one's here to here. This one's here to here. And we got to work out what these cadences are. And these do have names. We have our perfect. We have our Plagal cadences, which is 4 to 1. And then the odd one, which is the one that doesn't end in 1. Instead of like the perfect, which starts with 5, this one ends in 5, so it's imperfect. So they do have proper names which we can use, and we'll come back to that in a sec. There is another one which is the interrupted cadence, but we'll have a look at that shortly. So let's have a look at what we have here. We have A going to D. So I always like to make the assumption that what if D was the 1? So if you had D, and then I really like this section because it kind of brings together all the kind of skills before. So let's go back to the scale writing one. Let's write out a D major scale. We go D, E, F sharp, F sharp, G, natural, and then A. So if we assume that this was the 1, then a fifth above that would be 5. So 5, that would be an A chord going to a D chord. So it looks like we have a perfect cadence here, because this would be the 5 going to D. So I'm going to go and kind of think, I think that this might be a perfect cadence. So I would either write, you could write here at a 5, 2, 1, or you could write the actual name for it, which is a perfect cadence. Now we've talked about cadences in lecture. I would like to put together kind of the lecture series that I kind of gave, I think it was in the early couple of weeks, where I talked about the chord's function, and that all ties in, you know, moving from a dominant chord to a tonic chord. But here we don't actually have to worry too much about kind of the function. We just have to worry about the actual physical label, which is a perfect cadence. I don't even have to write in cadence, I could just write perfect because that's what it is. And then we have to work out the 1. And we've already established, because we always make the assumption that the second chord is 1 when we're starting off. So we just need to write D major. So let's have a look at this second one. Let's try and work it out using the same process. We have G, I always do the second chord first because it's just a bit easier. G, B, D, and another G on top. Oh no, hang on. G, B, D. That'll do. And then what do we have here? We have D, C. We have F sharp because of the key signature, and an A. So D, F sharp, A, C. You could use your manuscript paper just like we did for the previous one when we were identifying chords, and the G, B, D. So this looks like a G chord, G major. I'll use the just jazz symbol. It's a little triangle, just as a quick shorthand. And when then we have a D7 chord here. We would work that out, the kind of quality, by going D, F sharp, A, that's a major, and then the C is it's a tone rather than a semitone below, so that is going to be a D7 chord. And just as a quick heads up, if it's a dominant 7th chord, it's most likely going to be perfect or interrupted, but it's a good hazard, kind of good indicator of what the chord's function is. Whether it actually achieves its function, which determines what kind of cadence is a different thing. But just be wary of the 7th, not because it's going to lose you marks if you miss it, but just because it might help kind of indicate what chord you have going on. And then let's make the assumption. So we always make the assumption, start off with, that the second chord is 1. So we'll do that. We'll just call this 1 for now. So if we had G, and then let's see what D is in relation to G. We want it to either be 4 or 5. So G, A, B, C, D, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Meaning that if this was the 1, then this would be the 5, giving us a perfect cadence, because that's 5 to 1. Meaning, just like before, we have a perfect cadence. Perfect cadence, lovely. So now we need to work out the G and the key, and remember, it's just asking you what is the 1, and we've already worked out the 1, so that is going to be G. The key at G is G, quite conveniently. And if you kind of look at the overall structure of the Bach chorale, I know we can't see all of it because I've made space just to have this half on the page, but it started off in G and then it just modulated to D, and then when we got to here we're getting into all the weird funky chords. What do we have here? I'm not entirely sure without working it out, but it looks like we've modulated quite a way around the circle of fifths at this point, and then we bring it back to D, and then we bring it back to our home chord of G to finally resolve. So, but in terms of the actual question, stage 1 is to label out the notes we have, just like we've done before, then to work out what chords we've got. Then we need to work out the cadence. So I always make the assumption that the second chord is 1, and then I count up. Say, for example, this was a G chord here, and I went up D, E, F, G. Then that would be a 4 to 1, which would mean it's Plagal. Now, what happens, I'm just going to write out some chords quickly. That might be different. So let's use our G chord as an example, because we're in the key of G. So if we have G as our second chord, and we had D before it, then we'd go G, A, B, C, D. That's 5 above, so that would be 5 to 1. And that would give us our perfect cadence. If this second chord, or this preceding chord rather, if we had the chord progression, what did I say? I said G, or I did it in a different key earlier. So let's have a C to G. What chord progression is that? Well, if we make the assumption that this is our 1 chord, then G, A, B, C, that would be a 4. And we check, is that a cadence? Yes, it is. It's a Plagal cadence, so we'd write down Plagal. Let's see if we had a chord progression such as, trying to think what would be good. Let's have F, G. Let's work out. So F, so if you started on G, you go G, A, B, C, D, E, F. So that'd be like 7 to 1, which isn't, and it should be F sharp anyway in the key of G. So it's definitely not that. That's not our perfect cadence. So we need to try it again with the assumption now. Instead of assuming that this is 1, the next stage is to assume that it's 5. So what is, if G is 5, then if you go down 1, G down to F, that would be 4. And 4 leading to 5, that looks like a perfect cadence. So in that case, sorry, not perfect, imperfect, because it ends on 5. So always start with the assumption that the second chord's gonna be the 1, and if it doesn't add up because the chord above it isn't a 5th or a 4th, then it's probably gonna be imperfect. So check that one next. And then the final one that comes up in Bach chorales a fair amount is interrupted. These are a bit harder to spot. And it's more, instead of focusing on the second chord, it's more the chord in front. So it goes 5 and then somewhere else. So not to 1. So 5 wants to lead to 1. That's the quintessential rule of music harmony. So just as an example of how we could do that, I'll just think of a quick chord progression. So we could have G to A minor. So we work out our, we'll go through the checklist. So we start off, is this 1? Well, if that's 1, then this is going to be 7, and that's not either perfect or Plagal, so it's not going to be that. So let's make the assumption that this is 5. Then it's not going to be 5 because it's a minor chord. We want this to be major. So let's make the assumption that this is 5, which is the third step. And then what does that make this? This makes this the minor 6 chord, which is interrupted. We are expecting our resolution from G going to C probably. And then we have to go to this A chord, which means that it's interrupted. The resolution's interrupted. And this means that, what's the key at this piece? Well, we don't actually have the 1 written down, so we'd have to do the extra stage of going, okay, if G's the 5, then we have to go down. So G, we'll go, or yeah, so G, F, E, D, C. So the 1, in this case, would be C major, meaning if the chord here, if it was asking for the key, it would be C major. So these are kind of the weirder cadences. However, they do show up. This one less so, and the imperfect does show up quite a bit. But these two are our first cadences. And I'm going to show you a quick kind of shorthand on how I kind of just quickly stare at a piece and I work out if it's, or I get a kind of a preliminary idea on the key of a piece based on what cadence it uses, and that is the bass. The bass is the most important kind of line harmonically. Melodically, it's the kind of going to be the soprano, but in terms of working out our cadences, our bass line is going to tell us a lot. And you could work out some of these chord progressions just looking at the bass. So always check the bass as a little kind of hint. So if we have D here in the bass, and then we have A here, or if we worked out our D major scale, D, E, F sharp, G, A, that would be 5, and that would be 1, which is already screaming to me that the key is in D and the cadence is perfect. If we had the note, if this note instead of being A was, let's say, I don't know, G, then I'd go, what's the, so that would be like that. So what's that distance? Well, if that's the 1, then we go G, so D, E, F sharp, G, so that's the 4, which is screaming Plagal cadence. So you could make a fair judgment based on just the chord progression to give you an idea, and then check the entire chord, because it could be, it could put you off, but that gives you a good idea. And then it's kind of the realization of oh, it's not doing what I thought it's doing, therefore it's probably not going to be a perfect cadence. So you can work out a great deal just looking at the bass. Just to do that again, this kind of cheating method. Well, it's not cheating method. It's just kind of you know, using a bit of intuition that the bass is going to outline the harmony most. So let's have a look here. We have the note G. We have the note D here. So the D's kind of being played at this point. It's still kind of playing at that point. And then it drops down. So what's this gap between the G and the D? You could go G. I won't write it out actually. So G, A, B, C, D. So that's a 5 leading to 1. And already that tells me, oh, we're probably going to be in G major as our key, and the cadence is probably going to be perfect. So check the bass. It might be kind of well, it'll tell you the answer, and then you're just checking the answer. So, but then always make sure you check, because it might be a weird one. So let's just go through those cadences again. If the first chord is a 5th above our 1 chord, then it's perfect. If it's a 4th above, then it's Plagal. So that would be, if, for example, in C major, that would be a G. Let's say G7, because they're normally dominant. G7 leading to C. Plagal in the key of C. We know our 1's going to be C, so that would be F. Imperfect could be, oh, I don't know, D minor leading to G, and then holding that G because it wants to resolve, and then interrupted would be something like G going to A minor. I like that one, which would be 5 to 6, and this one would be 2 to 5. So it's worth kind of knowing your cadences and then checking against the bass, because I won't lie, most of these examples, the bass tells you what's going on. So it's imperative to check out what the bass is doing. So let's run through those stages again. So how would I approach this question? I'll just kind of rub out everything first. I can do that. Lovely. So just with a kind of a blank slate again, let's have a look. I get into the exam. I go, oh, okay. I'll get into, not the exam, I've already been in it for about quite a while at this point. So I'm on this part of the question. I've already done the questions above for the chords. So I'm just looking, oh, what do we have here? First thing I'm just going to do, just as a quick note, I'm going to write D, I'm going to write A, D, E, F sharp, G, A. That's going to be probably, I'm just going to pencil this one in 5 to 1. Right, now let's do the chord properly. So D, F sharp, A, D. Lovely, that's looking like a D major chord, so I'll put D. And then we've got A. Sorry. A again. C sharp. E. A, C sharp. Did I say this was G earlier? Oh, no, I know what I'm doing. I'm doing it in the... Yeah, I've got to make sure that I actually do it within the box. There we go. You just saw me make a mistake. Actually, that mistake wouldn't lose me any marks because it would still give me the same key and the same cadence. But just to be sure, so I'd go, oh, what chord do I have there? A, C sharp, E, G. That's a 5/7. That's an A7 chord. So yeah, this is looking right. So that's a good way to go through the process, and then I'd write out, 5 to 1, 4 to 1, something to 5, and then 5 to something other than 1. And then I'd go through the checklist. Is this a perfect or a Plagal cadence? Well, it is. What if it wasn't? Well, if we assume this is the D, and then we need to work out what this is above G, and then if we've got some kind of weird chord, then it might be an interrupted one, 5/7 leading to A minor. And then remember, this one is what is the F? What is the 1? So if this is a perfect cadence, then which one is the 1? Well, it's D, so the answer is going to be D major. And the cadence, well, we already worked out it's perfect. Or you could just put 7 to 1. Which is why I'd recommend writing out perfect cadence, because if you forget the 7, then technically it's not a 5 to 1, it's a 5/7 to 1. Although it is technically, they are both perfect cadences. So I would always lean on the lean on the way of caution, and I would put perfect. So this can be a tricky one, as I'm sure you've worked out, but it can be done very easily. Use the base method, just work out kind of how many, what is this progression. If this is 5th above this one, then it's going to be perfect cadence, and that's already told you both the answers in that. And then it's just got to work out what these chords are. So I would recommend, you've got to memorize these, and I would really get these cadences into your head, particularly these two, followed by the imperfect and then the interrupted as kind of the last resort. Typically, you're going to get, especially if you have one at the end of the piece, just using a bit of logic, that's where Bach's ending the piece. If you have one at the end, it's going to be a perfect cadence, and it's usually going to be in the key of the piece, unless it's minor. If you're in, for example, if you're in E minor key throughout the piece, sometimes he goes to E major at the end, called a tierce de Picardy. If you put that as the cadence in an example, that looks very impressive, but only if it is. So you could still write perfect cadence. So it's almost always going to be a perfect cadence, 5 to 1 of some description to end off a piece. And if you're in a weird key here, you're normally going to use perfect cadences to get back to your normal key. The rest of the piece is fair game. You might get perfect, interrupted, in imperfect, plagals, all over the place. So learn your cadences and use that base method. Remember, the key is basically what is the 1 chord. So if D is the 1 chord, then it's D. But if you've got something weird like 5 to 6 as your chord progression, then you just need to work out what the 1 would be in that case to give you your G, based on what cadence you've given. You could technically answer these chords differently in some descriptions, depending on your perspective, which is why these are taken kind of together. So there is some flexibility, and if you're looking at it the wrong kind of way and you go, oh no, this is actually kind of imperfect, then technically you can give it as that, as long as you've labelled it correctly. And if it's clear that you've labelled it, for example, if you said that this is in the key of G, and you've identified that this is 2 going to the 2 chord going to the, or the dominant 2 going to the 1, the 5, then you could technically call it imperfect. It wouldn't be as good, but there is some leg room, as long as you kind of make it clear that in that case the key is in G, and then okay, so technically that would be the 5 and that would be the major 2 chord with a 7th on it. So make it clear what you've done and write out your notes as well, because examiners and myself will check what you've written up here to see if you were on the right lines, where did it break down, or go, how did they get that? Oh, because they worked out the chords and they just wrote the chord progression, or they identified the bass progression. So use that manuscript paper and work out those cadences. Now, this is the final question, so I think this is a good point to leave the course. I've looked at every question in depth now, and definitely have a look at some Bach chorales. There's a great resource where I got all of these Bach chorales from for these videos, so I will link that in the description for this video, and check out them because they do come up all the way across the undergraduate course. They pop up at masters, they pop up in the theory diplomas. So Bach chorales are your new friend. Singing them, writing them, analysing them, completing half-done ones, and judging the work of others. So this is your nice introduction to Bach chorales if you haven't done it already. Lots of cadences, 4 voices, occasional 7ths, but mostly for the exam I wish you a jolly good luck. Get plenty of sleep the night before. Remember, you've got plenty of time. Go back and check all your answers, and I won't say have fun because it's an exam, but it's not too stressful. It's in the room where we normally have our lectures, and best of luck. I will see you, so my students who are making this at the moment, I will see you in person in the next couple of days for the exam, and if not, I will see you in the next video.